Have you ever felt this growing sense of disconnection, even though we live in a world that's supposedly more connected than ever? If so, you're definitely not alone. Today, we're going to dive deep into a piece by Andres Dobos to really unpack the hidden architecture behind that feeling. The goal here? To find a little bit of clarity in all this chaos. So, let's get into it. I mean, it's the great paradox of our time, isn't it? We've got these infinite feeds, endless group chats, but all this constant connection so often leaves us feeling more isolated, more fragmented than before. We're going to get to the very root of why that is. And I'll give you a hint. The answer is so much deeper than just, too much screen time. So the core idea here hangs on this really powerful metaphor about mirrors. For centuries, a mirror did one simple thing. It showed you, your physical self, right there in the world. But today's mirror, the algorithmic one on our screens, it shows you something completely different. It reflects a pattern of your clicks, your likes, all your data. It's not reflecting a person anymore. It's reflecting a simulation of your preferences. It's just feeding back this echo of who its system thinks you are. Okay, so what's the root cause of this massive shift? What's so fascinating is that this isn't some new glitch in our modern software. The argument here is that it's actually the final stage of a process that's been unfolding for thousands and thousands of years. The steady externalization of our own minds. Just look at this progression. It all starts with something like cave paintings, storing memory on a wall instead of in your head. Then writing comes along and organizes our thoughts into nice, neat lines. The printing press then scales this up massively, creating these shared national consciousnesses. Fast forward to the 20th century, and digital clouds centralize our collective memory. And now, today, AI isn't just storing our thoughts, it's starting to automate and even guide them. With each step, we've placed more of our core mental functions outside of ourselves. And there's a name for this process, a really key concept from the philosopher Bernard Stiegler. He called it tertiary retention. It's basically the storage of our collective memory, our culture, our history, our knowledge, outside of any single human mind. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but Stiegler gave a warning. He said that when this whole process is driven by industry, it can lead to something really dangerous, the industrialization of consciousness itself. We've been through this kind of rewiring before. Marshall McLuhan brilliantly pointed out that the printing press didn't just help us share information, it fundamentally changed how we perceived reality. It created a linear, private way of thinking. The technology literally reshaped our very sense of self. But our technology today does the exact opposite of print. Instead of neat, orderly line of text, the digital screen just collapses everything into this chaotic now. Every voice, every moment in history, every possible version of the truth, it's all there, competing for our attention all at the same time. It's a radical, radical shift from the ordered world that print created. And this brings us to the crucial mechanism at work here. It's like a three-step automation loop. First, we externalize. We turn our lives into symbols, our likes, our searches, our data. Second, we automate. We build these huge systems to process all those symbols. And third, and this is the key, we re-import the output as guidance, letting it shape what we see and what we do. AI is basically the perfection of this loop, and it's closing it ever tighter. So, what are the actual consequences of living inside this loop? This is where that feeling that things are just off really starts to connect to our day-to-day reality. The effects are societal, they're political, and they are deeply, deeply personal. The first and maybe the biggest consequence is a structural failure of trust. That symbolic scaffolding that we use to build shared meaning and social cohesion, the shared stories, the values, the institutions, it's all breaking down. And look, this isn't just a vibe. The data backs it up completely. The Edelman Trust Barometer, for instance, shows this global collapse in our faith in core institutions, like government and the media. We've gone from looking up to these institutions for truth to basically looking at each other with suspicion. Now, we have to be really careful here. The old unified we was not perfect. Far from it. It was often an oppressive consensus that silenced a lot of voices. So its breakdown was, in many ways, absolutely necessary for justice. But here's the tragedy. In dying, it threatens the very possibility of having any shared reality, any we at all. And this all has an immense psychological cost. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls it the burnout society. See, in a world without shared meaning, the self just becomes a project. We're constantly pushed to perform, to optimize, to brand ourselves within the system, and it leads to the state of profound exhaustion. The pressure to constantly create and share our lives becomes its own form of self-exploitation. Stigler had a term for this inner emptiness too: symbolic misery. It's the great paradox of our age, right? We are drowning in information, an endless scroll of interpretations and data points, but we are absolutely starving for a stable sense of meaning that connects our personal lives to some kind of collective purpose. Of course, this breakdown has devastating political costs. When there's no shared reality, democratic debate just grinds to a halt. Real action gets replaced by online performance. And as we all retreat further and further into our own symbolic bubbles, the very foundations of our legal and political systems start to erode. This takes us to the final and, honestly, the most profound part of this whole analysis. What is the ultimate destination of this technological path we're on? It's a kind of philosophical endpoint for our civilization's entire project. Over a century ago, Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead, right? He meant that the single, transcendent source of truth and meaning for the West was gone. Well, Debose argues that the vacuum this created wasn't filled by reason, like the Enlightenment hoped. Instead, it was filled by technics, by our systems, our tools, our technologies. And this has led to what the author calls the Great Conversion. For millennia, we tried to understand being through sacred texts, through scripture. Now we are converting that text into code. The search for divine revelation has been replaced by the drive for algorithmic optimization. Coherence no longer comes from the sacred, it comes from the system. And so we arrive at this incredibly stark conclusion. We have built a flawless machine for generating, processing, and reflecting meaning. It operates perfectly, but it does so completely without us. And when we ask it the most important questions about purpose, about value, about why any of this even matters, the machine is silent. It has no answer. And this leaves us with the ultimate question. It's one that only we can answer. After we've externalized our memory, our trust, and our sense of meaning into these automated mirrors, what is the purpose of a human collective? What is a we even for? That's the challenge our new reality poses to every one of us. And finding an answer, that's the critical work of our time.